A poor single father married a 71-year-old wealthy woman. 7 nights later, he realized that. The autumn breeze swept through the park, carrying the laughter of children and the rustle of fallen leaves. Nathan Cole sat on a weathered bench, his 6-year-old daughter, Emma, perched beside him, giggling as she licked her melting ice cream. For a brief moment, the weight of unpaid bills and looming eviction faded into the background as he watched her smile.
But his thoughts were interrupted when an unfamiliar voice spoke from behind. "He has your eyes," the woman said, her tone calm yet commanding.
Nathan turned, startled. A silver-haired woman stood a few feet away, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place amidst the casual park-goers. She held a steaming cup of coffee in one hand, her piercing blue eyes fixed on him. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Nathan asked, his guard instantly rising. "No," she replied with a faint smile, stepping closer. "But I know you, Mr. Cole." His stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" The woman extended her free hand. "Evelyn Brooks. I'm here to discuss an opportunity, one that might change your life." Nathan hesitated, glancing at Emma, who was now absorbed in her ice cream. He didn't know who this woman was, but something about her presence put him on edge. Evelyn seemed to sense his unease. "Don't worry," she said, gesturing across the park. Nathan followed her gaze to a young woman with a stroller who stood waiting nearby, offering a warm smile. "I made arrangements for her to watch your daughter while we talk. She's a licensed caregiver. I can assure you she'll be safe." Nathan's instinct screamed at him to refuse, but the thought of a warm meal and a chance to get answers outweighed his fear. He knelt to Emma's level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "I need to talk to this lady for a little bit, okay? Stay with that nice lady over there, and I'll be back." Before you know it, Emma looked up at him, her wide eyes filled with trust. "Okay, Daddy." Nathan walked her over to the caregiver, ensuring she was settled before turning back to Evelyn. "All right," he said, his voice heavy with suspicion. "Let's talk." Minutes later, they sat across from each other at a cafe overlooking the park. Evelyn sipped her coffee while Nathan studied her, trying to decipher her intentions. Everything about her, her demeanor, her tailored suit, the way she carried herself, screamed wealth and power. But what could someone like her possibly want with someone like him? "I'll be straightforward," Evelyn began, setting her cup down. "I know about your situation, Mr. Cole. Your wife passed away 2 years ago, leaving you with crippling medical debt. You've been juggling part-time jobs to support your daughter while trying to keep a roof over your heads. But the truth is, you're sinking." Nathan's jaw tightened. "How do you know all this? Did you hire someone to spy on me?" "I don't waste time on trivialities," she replied, unfazed by his accusation. "Let's just say I have access to certain resources." Nathan leaned back, crossing his arms. "So, what do you want?" Evelyn met his gaze, her expression unyielding. "Marry me." For a moment, Nathan thought he'd misheard her. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "This isn't about love or romance. It's a business arrangement. I'll pay off your debts, secure your daughter's future, and ensure you never have to worry about money again. In return, you'll be my husband." Nathan couldn't stop replaying Evelyn's words in his head as he walked back to the bench where Emma waited. Marriage? To a stranger? And for what? Money? Security? He had every reason to dismiss the offer, but every time he thought of Emma's future, his resolve wavered. "Daddy, look what I made!" Emma held up a colorful drawing of a house, a bright sun and stick figures, a little girl and her dad. She grinned, her gap-toothed smile melting his heart. Nathan crouched beside her, ruffling her hair. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Is that our house?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Yup, but it's bigger, with lots of rooms, so you don't have to sleep on the couch anymore." Nathan's throat tightened. She had no idea how much he was struggling to keep a roof over their heads. Every night he stayed up late, staring at bills he couldn't pay, and every morning he woke up determined to shield her from the harsh reality of their lives. But how much longer could he keep this up? Back in their cramped apartment, Nathan sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of overdue bills. The eviction notice sat on top, mocking him. The deadline was only a week away, and he had no idea how he'd make the rent. Emma was fast asleep in the bedroom, clutching her stuffed bunny. Nathan glanced at her through the cracked door, guilt washing over him. She deserved better, a stable home, a childhood free from worry. But could he really accept Evelyn's proposal? Could he trade his freedom, his dignity, for security? His gaze shifted to the photograph on the fridge. It was of his late wife Clara holding Emma as a baby. Her smile was radiant, her love for their family shining through. "What would you do, Clara?" Nathan whispered, his voice breaking. "Would you hate me for even thinking about this? The room remained silent, offering no answers. But one thought lingered in his mind. Evelyn Brooks wasn't just offering him money, she was offering Emma a future. The next morning, Nathan dressed Emma in her school uniform and walked her to the bus stop. She chatted excitedly about her day ahead, oblivious to the storm raging inside her father's mind. As the bus pulled away, Nathan stood on the curb, staring after it. Evelyn's offer replayed in his head. All you have to do is say yes. By the time the bus disappeared from view, Nathan had made his decision. Nathan arrived at the upscale bistro Evelyn had mentioned, his nerves frayed. The smell of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air as he spotted her sitting at a corner table sipping tea. She looked as poised and unshakable as ever. "You came," she said, glancing up from her tablet with a faint smile. Nathan slid into the seat across from her, his jaw tight. "I need to hear the terms again." Evelyn placed her teacup down delicately. "It's simple. We marry. I clear your debts, provide a trust fund for your daughter, and ensure financial stability for the rest of your life. In return, you'll be my husband, a companion, someone to share my name, my estate, and, on occasion, my public appearances. No romance, no expectations. And if I refuse?" Nathan asked, his voice low. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Then I walk away, and you return to your life if you can call it that. But we both know you're here because you don't have another option." Nathan clenched his fists under the table. She wasn't wrong. He had no other option, but it still felt like selling his soul. "Why me?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Out of everyone, why did you choose me?" Evelyn leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Because you're a father, you understand sacrifice. And because I see potential in you, Mr. Cole. With my resources, you could build a life you never imagined. But without me—" She trailed off, letting the silence speak for itself. Nathan stared at her, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. This wasn't just about him, it was about Emma. Could he do this? Could he give up everything he believed in for her? Finally he exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "I'll do it." The courthouse was cold and sterile, a far cry from the grand weddings Nathan had always imagined. Instead of a crowd of family and friends, there were only 4 people: Nathan, Evelyn, her lawyer, and the officiant. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above them, and the smell of old wood and paper filled the air. Nathan adjusted the stiff collar of the suit Evelyn had provided, feeling out of place in the expensive fabric. Beside him, Evelyn stood tall and composed, her tailored dress as immaculate as her demeanor. She glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable. "Shall we begin?" the officiant asked, his voice echoing in the empty room. Nathan nodded, his throat dry. As the ceremony began, the words felt distant, almost surreal. Promises and vows he barely understood flowed past him like a river he had no choice but to cross. When it came time to say, "I do," his voice wavered, but he forced the words out. "I do." Evelyn's voice was steady as she repeated the same words. "I do." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Evelyn turned to Nathan with a faint smile. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Cole." The drive to Evelyn's estate was silent, save for the hum of the car engine. Nathan stared out the window, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. He thought of Emma, safely at school, unaware of the drastic steps he'd taken to secure their future. When the car finally pulled through the massive wrought-iron gates, Nathan's breath caught. The estate was enormous, a sprawling mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and towering trees. It looked like something out of a magazine, beautiful but intimidating. "This is home now," Evelyn said as the car rolled to a stop in front of the grand entrance. Nathan stepped out, suitcase in hand, and followed Evelyn into the house. The marble floors gleamed under the chandelier's light, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and polish. It was luxurious, yet cold, like a museum rather than a home. A stern-faced butler greeted them at the door. "Welcome back, Mrs. Brooks," he said, bowing slightly. His gaze shifted to Nathan, his expression unreadable. "And Mr. Cole." Nathan nodded awkwardly, unsure of what to say. Evelyn gestured toward the grand staircase. "You'll both have everything you need," Evelyn said, gesturing toward the grand staircase. "Emma's room is the first door on the left. Nathan, yours is across the hall. Unpack and we'll discuss the next steps over dinner." Nathan sat stiffly at the long dining table that evening, feeling like a guest in someone else's home. The table was set with fine china and silverware, and the food, prepared by a chef he hadn't seen, was far more extravagant than he was used to. Evelyn sat at the other end of the table, impeccably dressed as always. She sipped her wine with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Nathan, on the other hand, fumbled with the unfamiliar cutlery, his appetite dampened by the weight of the situation. "I trust the accommodations are to your liking," Evelyn said, breaking the silence. "They're fine," Nathan replied, forcing a polite smile. "But this place, it's a lot to take in." "You'll get used to it," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "You'll have to." Evelyn set her fork down and finally met his gaze. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held a sharpness that made Nathan's stomach twist. "You'll learn soon enough," she said quietly. "For now, focus on adjusting to your new life." Her cryptic response only deepened Nathan's unease. What had he gotten himself into? He had thought of leaving Emma with a relative, but he had no one. But one thing is certain: he will protect his daughter with everything he has. Later that night, Nathan wandered the halls of the estate, unable to sleep. The house was eerily quiet, the only sounds the faint creak of floorboards beneath his feet and the distant hum of the wind outside. As he passed by a hallway on the east wing, he noticed a door that stood out from the others. It was locked, the brass handle gleaming in the dim light. For some reason, it sent a chill down his spine. He tried the handle out of curiosity, but it didn't budge. "Is there a reason you're roaming the house at this hour?" Nathan jumped, spinning around to see Evelyn standing a few feet away, her arms crossed. She wore a silk robe, her silver hair glinting in the moonlight. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone was sharp. "I couldn't sleep," Nathan said quickly. "I was just looking around." Evelyn's eyes flicked to the locked door before returning to him. "Stay out of this wing," she said, her voice cold. "There's nothing here for you." Without another word, she turned and disappeared down the hallway, leaving Nathan standing in the silence, his unease growing by the second. Nathan's nights at Evelyn's estate became a haze of restless sleep and unanswered questions. The locked door on the east wing lingered in his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. Evelyn's cryptic warning to stay out only made him more curious. He began to notice the peculiarities of the house. The staff moved silently, avoiding his gaze, and Evelyn spent long hours locked in her study, speaking in hushed tones over the phone. One night, unable to resist, Nathan crept down the dimly lit hallway toward the east wing. The brass handle of the locked door gleamed faintly under the moonlight. He pressed his ear against the door, but all he heard was silence. The next morning at breakfast, Evelyn sat at the head of the long dining table, sipping tea and reading a newspaper. Nathan sat across from her, his coffee untouched. He couldn't shake the feeling that she somehow knew what he'd been up to the night before. "Did you sleep well?" she asked without looking up. "Well enough," Nathan replied, his voice stiff. "This place takes some getting used to." Evelyn folded the newspaper neatly and set it aside. "It does," she agreed, her sharp eyes locking onto his. "But I do hope you're not exploring areas of the house you shouldn't be." Nathan's heart skipped a beat. "I wasn't. I just—" "Good," she interrupted, her tone icy. "There are boundaries, Nathan. For your own good, I suggest you respect them." Her words sent a chill down his spine. He forced a nod, but his curiosity only grew. Over the following days, Emma's presence began to change the atmosphere in the mansion. Her laughter filled the halls, breaking through the cold silence that had defined the house for years. She often tried to include Evelyn in her games, bringing her drawings to show or asking her to join in tea parties. Emma reminded her of everything she didn't have. A few days later, while Evelyn was out attending a charity event, Nathan saw his chance. He waited until the staff was busy with their duties before sneaking into Evelyn's study. The room was lined with dark bookshelves and filled with the faint scent of lavender. Papers and photographs were scattered across her desk, and an ornate key sat prominently on top of a leather-bound journal. His breath quickened as he picked up the journal. The key was heavier than he expected, its intricate design glinting in the sunlight streaming through the windows. Nathan flipped open the journal, his eyes scanning the pages. It was Evelyn's handwriting, sharp, deliberate, and cold. Each entry revealed fragments of her life, her pain, and her obsession with revenge. His chest tightened as he read. "The Reynolds ruined everything. Harold's heart couldn't take the stress of the bankruptcy. They left me with nothing. But I'll take it all back, one piece at a time, starting with him." Nathan froze. His mind reeled as he realized she wasn't talking about just anyone. She was talking about his late wife's family. The truth hit him like a punch to the gut. Evelyn hadn't chosen him by chance. She had orchestrated everything. When Evelyn returned that evening, Nathan couldn't hold back any longer. He confronted her in the grand sitting room, the journal clutched in his trembling hands. "You lied to me," he said, his voice low but filled with anger. "This wasn't about companionship or legacy. It was about revenge. My wife's family, my family, did something to you, and now you're using me to settle a score." Evelyn's calm facade cracked for a moment, but she quickly composed herself. "And if I am?" she said, her voice sharp. "Your wife's father destroyed everything I had. Harold died because of the stress, and I was left to pick up the pieces. Do you have any idea what that's like?" Nathan's fists clenched. "So you decided to punish me? I had nothing to do with what happened to you." Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "You're wrong. You had everything to do with it. Your wife's family walked away with their fortune intact, while I buried my husband. I swore I would make them pay." "But my wife is dead," Nathan said, his voice trembling. "She's been gone for 2 years. This isn't justice. It's madness." Evelyn's expression softened for the briefest moment, but the steel in her eyes remained. "Exactly. The Reynolds still has something that I could never have. You don't understand, Nathan." That night Nathan couldn't sleep. Evelyn's words haunted him, but so did the image of the locked door in the east wing. He knew now that it held answers he needed, if he was ever going to protect himself and Emma. Clutching the key he'd taken from her study, he crept down the hallway. The house was silent, the darkness oppressive. When he reached the door, he hesitated for a moment before sliding the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. As the door creaked open, Nathan's breath caught. The room was filled with photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings pinned to the walls. It was a shrine. No, a war room. Dedicated to Evelyn's vendetta, pictures of his late wife's father and family were marked with red ink. Legal documents detailed the bankruptcy that had ruined Evelyn's life. And in the center of it all was a large framed photograph of Evelyn and her late husband, Harold Brooks. Nathan stepped back, his heart pounding. The scale of her obsession was staggering. And then he saw it, a folder labeled with his own name. Inside were pages of detailed information about him, Emma, and their life before Evelyn. She had been watching him for months, studying every aspect of his life to pull him into her web. Nathan felt sick. He hadn't just married a stranger. He had walked into the lair of someone far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Nathan barely slept after discovering Evelyn's war room. Every inch of the room screamed obsession, from the red ink scrawled over his late wife's family photos to the chilling details of his and Emma's lives documented with meticulous precision. Evelyn's web had ensnared him, and he couldn't see a way out. The next morning, Evelyn's composure was as icy as ever. She sat at the breakfast table, skimming tea and skimming the morning paper. Her casual demeanor only heightened Nathan's unease. "You're awfully quiet this morning," she remarked without looking up. Nathan swallowed hard, forcing a neutral tone. "Just adjusting to everything." Evelyn smirked faintly, her eyes glinting over the rim of her teacup. "Good. I expect you'll find your footing soon enough. I've been more than patient with you, Nathan, but if you think you can go behind my back, you're sorely mistaken." Nathan's chest tightened. "You don't own me, Evelyn." Her lips curled into a cruel smile. "Don't I? You agreed to this arrangement, Nathan. I paid your debts, secured your daughter's future, and now you think you can walk away?" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You're mine now, Nathan. Don't forget that." That evening, Nathan sat alone in the grand library, his thoughts racing. Evelyn had made it clear that she would do whatever it took to maintain control, but he couldn't let her threats stop him. Not when Emma's future was on the line. He needed a plan. Nathan pulled out the documents he'd taken from the locked room earlier and began combing through them for leverage. Among the clippings and legal files, one name kept appearing: Edward Reynolds, Clara's father. It all made sense now. Evelyn blamed Edward Reynolds for the collapse of her family's fortune and the death of her husband. Nathan's marriage to Evelyn wasn't just a business arrangement. It was a calculated move to exact revenge on the Reynolds family, and by extension, on him. Nathan's pulse quickened. The next morning, Nathan waited for Evelyn in the sitting room. Nathan paced the sitting room, his fists clenched at his sides. His heart pounded as he replayed everything he had discovered about Evelyn, her vendetta, her lies, her manipulation. Emma was upstairs, blissfully unaware of the battle brewing between her father and their unlikely benefactor. When Evelyn finally entered the room, she was as composed as ever, dressed in a sleek black dress, her silver hair pulled back into an elegant bun. Her piercing blue eyes swept over Nathan, registering the fury in his stance. "To what do I owe this dramatic summons, Mr. Cole?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with impatience. Nathan turned to face her, holding up a folder filled with the damning documents he had found. "I know the truth, Evelyn, about your past, about my wife's family, about why you really married me." Evelyn's lips tightened, but she didn't flinch. "And what truth would that be?" Nathan stepped closer, his voice rising. "This wasn't about companionship or legacy. It was about revenge. You married me to settle a score with Clara's father. You wanted me to feel the pain you went through when your family was destroyed. Evelyn's icy facade cracked for the briefest moment, a flicker of something raw and painful crossing her face, but she quickly regained her composure, her voice as sharp as ever. "And what if you're right, Nathan? What if this marriage was my way of balancing the scales? Does that change the fact that you needed me? That without me you'd still be drowning in debt and dragging your daughter along with you?" Nathan's fists clenched. "This wasn't help, it was a trap. You've been playing with my life, with Emma's life, like we're pieces on a chessboard." Evelyn's expression hardened. "Your wife's family ruined everything I had, Nathan. My husband died because of them. Harold's heart gave out under the weight of their betrayal. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To lose everything and watch the people responsible walk away unscathed?" Nathan's voice trembled with anger and grief. "Clara's gone, Evelyn. She's been gone for 2 years. My daughter and I had nothing to do with what happened to you." Evelyn's composure faltered, and for the first time, Nathan saw the deep pain buried beneath her icy exterior. Her voice cracked as she said, "Your family got to move on. Mine didn't. Harold didn't. I thought this would make it right." Nathan stared at her, his fury giving way to a bitter understanding. "You've spent your whole life chasing revenge. And where has it gotten you? You have all this wealth, this power, but you're still alone, Evelyn, and now you're dragging me and my daughter into your misery." Evelyn's shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She turned away, staring into the fire. "You're right," she admitted quietly. "My plan was to take out my revenge on Clara, the apple of Edward's eyes, but she died. I've built my life around anger, and I could take it. Just can't let go. And for a long time, it was enough. But then she came." Nathan frowned. "Who?" She glanced over her shoulder, her expression softening. "Emma. She reminds me of the life I lost, the family I could have had. I didn't expect her to affect me the way she has." Nathan's chest tightened. "Then stop this. Let it go before you destroy us all." Evelyn turned back to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a moment, Nathan thought he saw a glimpse of the woman she could have been. Kind, vulnerable, human. "I don't know if I can," she whispered. Nathan stepped forward, his voice rising. "This isn't about justice anymore, Evelyn. It's about your bitterness, your need to make everyone suffer because you can't move on." Evelyn's composure wavered, and for the first time her voice cracked. "You think you understand me? You think you know what it's like to lose everything, to watch the person you love die because someone else betrayed you?" Nathan shook his head. "No, I don't. But I do know that hurting innocent people won't bring Harold back. It won't fix what happened to you." Evelyn turned away, her shoulders trembling. "It's not about fixing it," she whispered. "It's about making them feel what I felt, the helplessness, the despair. They deserve that." "And what about me?" Nathan demanded. "What about Emma? Did we deserve to be dragged into this? Did she?" Evelyn flinched at the mention of Emma's name. For a moment her icy facade crumbled, and Nathan saw the pain and confusion lurking beneath. "I didn't plan for her," she admitted softly. "She wasn't part of the plan." "But she's here now," Nathan said, his voice softening. "And she sees you as someone who could be kind, someone who could care. Is this the example you want to set for her?" Evelyn sank into the armchair by the window, the folder slipping from her fingers. She stared out into the darkness, her expression unreadable. "I don't know any more," she murmured. "I don't know if I'm doing this for justice or because it's all I have left." "You have to," Nathan said firmly, "because if you don't, you'll lose what little you have left." The room fell silent, the tension between them thick and suffocating. Evelyn stared at him for a long moment, her expression a mixture of defiance and sorrow. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan exhaled, the confrontation leaving him emotionally drained. As Evelyn left the room, he sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. He had won a small victory, but he knew the battle was far from over. Upstairs, Emma's laughter echoed faintly, a reminder of what was at stake. Nathan made a silent vow. No matter what Evelyn decided, he would protect his daughter at all costs. The days that followed the confrontation were heavy with tension, yet something had shifted. Evelyn, once a fortress of icy control, seemed to crack ever so slightly. She spent less time locked away in her study and more time lingering in the shared spaces of the house, her sharp edges softening whenever Emma was nearby. Nathan watched her carefully, his emotions in turmoil. Part of him still resented her for what she'd done, for manipulating him, for turning his life into a pawn in her twisted game of revenge. But another part of him, one he wasn't ready to admit, saw her pain. He saw the way her eyes softened when Emma laughed, the faint smile that flickered on her lips when Emma tugged at her hand to show her a drawing or begged her to join a tea party. "Miss Evelyn," Emma chirped one afternoon, holding up a small plastic teacup, "you have to come to my tea party. Daddy said you'd be too busy, but I told him you're never too busy for tea." Nathan looked up from across the room, startled. "Was Emma, I didn't—" "It's fine," Evelyn interrupted, raising a hand to silence him. She turned to Emma, her expression unreadable. "Do you have enough tea for one more guest?" Emma's face lit up. "Yes. You can sit in the special chair. That's where the Queen sits." Evelyn hesitated for a moment, as though the idea of playing along with a child's game was foreign to her. But then she nodded, allowing Emma to pull her toward the small table covered with mismatched plastic dishes. Nathan watched from a distance, his wariness clashing with the faint tug of something resembling hope. As Emma poured imaginary tea into Evelyn's cup, Nathan caught a glimpse of something he hadn't seen before. Evelyn laughing. It was soft, almost hesitant, as though she hadn't allowed herself such a moment in years. For a fleeting second, she looked human. That night Nathan tucked Emma into bed, her stuffed bunny clutched tightly in her arms. She yawned as he smoothed her hair back. "Miss Evelyn's funny," she murmured sleepily. "She talks all fancy, like a queen." Nathan chuckled softly, though the weight in his chest didn't lift. "She's different, that's for sure." Emma's eyes fluttered closed, her voice a whisper. "She's nice. I think she likes us." Nathan's smile faded as he stared at her peaceful face. Did Evelyn like them, or was this just another layer to her manipulation? The thought gnawed at him as he left her room, the door creaking softly behind him. Over the next few days, Evelyn continued to surprise Nathan. She joined Emma in the garden, helping her collect wildflowers for a bouquet. She praised Emma's crayon drawings, even offering to frame one for her study. Once, Nathan walked into the kitchen to find Evelyn teaching Emma how to knead dough for bread, her usually pristine hands dusted with flour. But for every moment of warmth, there were shadows. Nathan couldn't shake the memory of the locked room, the shrine to Evelyn's pain, or the venom in her voice during their confrontation. Her capacity for cruelty was undeniable, and the thought of her turning that darkness toward Emma made his stomach churn. One evening, as Emma played on the living room floor, Evelyn sat nearby, reading a book. Nathan took a seat across from her, his gaze fixed on her sharp profile. "What are you doing this?" he asked quietly. Evelyn didn't look up. "Doing what?" "This," Nathan said, gesturing toward Emma. "Spending time with her. Being kind." Evelyn's lips tightened. "Do you not trust me, Nathan?" "Should I?" he countered, his voice steady. "You've lied to me before, manipulated me. How do I know this isn't just another move in your game?" Evelyn finally met his gaze, and for a moment he saw something raw in her eyes. "Because I didn't expect her," she admitted, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "I didn't expect her to remind me of everything I lost, of the person I used to be before all of this." Nathan leaned forward, his voice low. "Evelyn, I need to know, is she safe here?" Evelyn's expression shifted, her walls going back up. "She's safe, Nathan. I would never harm her." "Not even to hurt me?" he pressed. Her jaw tightened. "No, not even then." The words were firm, but Nathan couldn't shake his unease. Evelyn might not harm Emma directly, but her obsession with revenge and control was dangerous. He had to stay vigilant. The days slipped by, a delicate balance of uneasy coexistence. Emma's laughter filled the mansion's cold halls, softening its edges in ways Nathan could never have imagined. Evine, too, seemed lighter, her interactions with Emma often tender, even. That night, as Nathan tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, is Miss Evelyn sad?" Nathan froze, caught off guard by the question. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "She doesn't smile like you do," Emma said, clutching her stuffed bunny. "Even when she laughs, her eyes look sad." Nathan swallowed hard, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "She's been through a lot, Em. Sometimes, when people get hurt, it's hard for them to feel happy again." Emma frowned thoughtfully. "Maybe we can make her happy?" Nathan's chest tightened. "Maybe," he said softly, kissing her forehead. "Get some sleep, okay?" As he left the room, Evelyn's words echoed in his mind. Emma, she wasn't part of the plan. For the first time, Nathan wondered if Emma might be the key to unraveling the darkness in Evelyn's heart. The next morning, Nathan found Evelyn sitting at the breakfast table, staring out the window. She looked older, her usual air of confidence replaced by something fragile. "Morning," Nathan said cautiously, sitting across from her. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant. "Harold used to sit there," she said, gesturing to Nathan's seat. "Every morning he'd read the paper, drink his coffee, and tell me about his plans for the day. He was always so full of hope." Nathan didn't know how to respond, so he stayed silent. "I lost him because of greed," Evelyn continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Edward Reynolds promised him a partnership, a way to grow our business. Instead, he left us with nothing. Harold's heart couldn't take it. He died believing he had failed me." Nathan leaned forward, his voice gentle. "That wasn't your fault, Evelyn." Her gaze snapped to his, a flicker of anger in her eyes. "Wasn't it? I encouraged Harold to trust Edward. I told him it was the right move. And when everything fell apart, I was the one who pushed him to keep fighting. I was the one who drove him to his grave." Nathan hesitated, then said, "Maybe that's why you've been holding on to this for so long, because it's easier to blame others than to face your own guilt." Evelyn flinched as if he had struck her, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she looked away, her shoulders slumping. "Maybe you're right," she murmured. Later that day, Nathan found Emma in the garden, picking flowers. Evelyn stood nearby, watching her with an expression Nathan couldn't quite place, part longing, part sadness. "Miss Evelyn," Emma called, running up to her with a handful of daisies. "These are for you." Evelyn crouched down, accepting the flowers with trembling hands. "Thank you, Emma," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "They're beautiful," Emma beamed. "You can put them in a vase in your room. Daddy says flowers make everything brighter." Evelyn glanced at Nathan, her eyes glistening. "Does he now?" Nathan met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "She has a way of seeing the good in people," he said quietly, "even when they don't deserve it." Evelyn looked down at the flowers in her hands, her lips pressing into a thin line. "She's a remarkable child," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She deserves a future," Nathan said firmly. "Free from all of this?" Evelyn didn't respond, but her grip on the daisies tightened. That evening, Evelyn surprised Nathan by calling him into her study. He entered cautiously, unsure of what to expect. She was seated behind her desk, the folder of documents he had uncovered placed neatly in front of her. "I've been thinking about what you said," Evelyn began, her tone measured. "About letting go." Nathan crossed his arms. "And," Evelyn slid the folder across the desk toward him. "You are right. I can't keep doing this. It won't bring Harold back. It won't undo what happened. All it's done is turn me into someone I don't even recognize." Nathan stared at the folder, disbelief flickering across his face. "You're giving this up just like that?" Evelyn let out a bitter laugh. "It's not just like that, Nathan. It's taken me years to reach this point. But Emma, she's reminded me of what I've lost, of what I could have had if I hadn't let revenge consume me." Nathan sat down, his voice softening. "So what now?" Evelyn sighed. "I'll give you and Emma the freedom you deserve. No strings attached." Nathan's chest tightened, hope warring with skepticism. "You mean that?" "Yes," Evelyn said firmly. Evelyn sat in her study, her obsession felt heavier than ever. The fire in the hearth flickered softly, its warmth unable to reach the cold that had settled in her heart. Her mind replayed Nathan's words. "Let it go, before you destroy what little humanity you have left." Her gaze drifted to a crayon drawing Emma had left behind during one of her visits. A sunny field with 3 stick figures labeled Emma, Daddy, and Miss Evelyn. It was simple, innocent, and unburdened by the pain she had carried for years. For the first time in decades, Evelyn felt a glimmer of clarity. Nathan and Emma stood in the grand foyer, their suitcases packed and ready. Evelyn entered, her usual composed demeanor replaced by something softer, almost fragile. In her hands she held a stack of papers and a small envelope. "I've made my decision," Evelyn began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. She placed the papers on the side table. "This is the marriage agreement. Consider it void." With one swift motion she tore the document in half, letting the pieces fall to the floor. Nathan's eyes widened. "Evelyn, are you sure?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I've spent too long trying to control everything. People, outcomes, my own pain. It's time to let go." She handed Nathan the envelope. "This is for you. It's a check to get something started. And the trust fund for Emma, that remains intact. She deserves every opportunity, no matter my mistakes." Nathan stared at her, his throat tightening. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Evelyn replied, her voice cracking slightly. She turned to Emma, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "Emma, you've been a light in this house. I hope you know how special you are." Emma grinned, her gap-toothed smile as bright as ever. "You're special too, Miss Evelyn. Maybe we can visit you someday?" Evelyn blinked back tears, a genuine laugh escaping her lips. "I'd like that." After seeing Nathan and Emma off, Evelyn returned to her study. The house felt emptier than ever, but for the first time she didn't mind. She picked up the crayon drawing Emma had made and placed it on her desk. It was time to build something meaningful, something that could help others rather than hurt them. As Nathan drove away from the estate, the weight of the past few weeks settled over him. He glanced at Emma in the rearview mirror, her laughter filling the car as she played with her stuffed bunny. For all the chaos Evelyn had caused, she had made one thing clear: Emma's future was secure. He thought about the woman he had come to know, brilliant, broken, and ultimately capable of change. Her decision to let go of her vendetta was as much a gift to herself as it was to him and Emma. It wasn't redemption, not entirely, but it was a start. Nathan pulled into the driveway of their modest new home, one he could finally afford thanks to Evelyn's help. As he carried their bags inside, Emma ran ahead, her giggles echoing through the house. "Daddy, come on!" she called, disappearing into her room. Nathan followed, leaning against the doorway as he watched her settle in. She placed her drawing of Miss Evelyn on her bedside table and turned to him with a big smile. "Are we going to be happy here, Daddy?" she asked. Nathan crouched down, pulling her into a hug. "We already are, sweetheart," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We already are." As he held her close, Nathan silently vowed to move forward, leaving the shadows of the past behind. They had weathered the storm together, and now, with a fresh start, the future felt brighter than ever. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment.